Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. This is a place and a time when we grapple with Christianity in the 21st century and for the 21st century. We have inherited belief systems and interpretations about God and Scripture and us. And for many of us, these inherited interpretations, a lot of what the tradition has brought to us, we now find is no longer tenable, no longer believable. And in this time that we're living in, where a lot of us are wrestling with the fact that what modern Christianity, conventional Christianity communicates seems to obscure what Christianity actually might really be about, and even distorts the heart of Christianity. So this is a place that we can come and wonder and question and explore other ways of thinking about Christianity in the 21st century and for the 21st century. And because of this time of the shaking of the foundations, to borrow a phrase from Tillich, that a lot of things are being questioned and wondered about. Because of this time of great change and a lot of things being unsettled, I suggest that this is the opportune time for us to explore and reconceive and reimagine and reconstruct how we talk about God and our faith, quote unquote, in God, and what we love most, and what can help us to live more humanely and live into a better future. So the overall title for this program year is Skylight and Seasoned Tongue and Groove, which are images that I draw from a poem by Seamus Heaney. And I'll post that poem as one of our closing slides this morning. The skylight can represent an opening, an opportunity to see beyond the familiar, to look at a horizon, to let in the unexpected, the unanticipated, the unplanned. Okay. And Seasoned Tongue and Groove, I think, is a good image for what Seamus Heaney calls the trunk lid fit of our thoughts, or what we find familiar, or what we think is settled. And a skylight in that seasoned tongue and groove opens up perhaps another way of seeing and a whole nother world of possibilities. And I would like to think of Second Saturday as a kind of skylight in our seasoned tongue and groove. The narrator in that poem, however, says, that he was against putting in a skylight. He was not for it. But after it was put in, he said he felt like the man who was lowered through the roof and was healed and was able to take up his mat and walk. That's from a biblical healing story. And I would like to think that Second Saturday gives us the same feeling. So I want to thank Megan McCluskey, who is with us today. She is doing our technical support. Megan was with us a couple of years ago, and I'm just, she's very busy with other things, but I'm delighted that she could come in today. Jake is traveling. He's in Texas doing a project. And I noticed in the chat, and by the way, I don't usually read the chat during our session, but I noticed that some people said that the text that I posted were blurry. And that might be because we're sort of working on a second iteration of things here. Jake sent the slides to Megan, and Megan is showing them. So that might be one of the reasons why things are a little less sharp today. But I want to thank Megan so much for being with us. And Megan, you told me that there is wind and rain in Tacoma. And so we'll just hope that everything holds up for us. It's a little windy here in Oregon too, but not, I think, what you're dealing with. And I want to welcome Jeff Creswell, who is a friend and colleague. And Jeff, would you orient us a little bit to our plenary time, which will be an opportunity for us to share our thoughts and impressions of this morning's reflections.
Sure. Good morning, Mary Ann, and good morning, Megan. It's great to have you back with us.
Yeah.
The plenary time is a time for you to respond and ask questions and make observations with Mary Ann after she has shared what she's going to share with us this morning in Second Saturday. And the way that we have structured it for you to be able to participate is that if you look at the bottom of your screen, there are a bunch of different options. One of them says reactions. If you click on reactions, you'll get an option that says raise hand. And if you just click on that, it'll put you up top in a queue, and I'll be calling on people from that queue. That queue does not always look the same for everyone. So it may look to you like you're the first in the queue, but to me, it might look different. So just be patient. We'll get to as many people as we can. And if we don't get to everyone in the time allotted, there is time for the coffee hour if you want to stay optionally, and we can continue that conversation. I would also say that because there are so many of us here today, it's important that you think about what you have to say before you raise your hand so that you have it composed. Some of us are think out loud people, and we can ramble a bit. I am certainly guilty of that. So it's important to compose what you have to say and keep it to 2 minutes. And just as a way of helping you remember that, if you go over 2 minutes, I'll just put up a little finger like this, which is a gentle way of saying it's time to close it down so that we can move on. So thanks, Mary Ann.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jeff. And I tend to talk before I think also. I had a brief conversation with Jeff and Carol last night, and they said, well, what do you want to talk about today? And I'll tell you in a moment. And I said, but I'm kind of muddling through. So join me in sort of muddling through some of my thoughts today. They're prompts for you. And I'm very eager to hear what you make of what I suggest today and how it makes you wonder. So today I want to explore briefly 3 topics that I think are really interconnected. And one is God and how we name God. Theology, I think, thinks of its task as maybe trying to explain God, as if we could, okay? But I want to talk about God as a symbol word, and what do we think we're talking about? Second thing I want to comment on today is theopoetics. And our wonderful guest last month, Scott Holland, who knows theopoetics well and teaches it at a course at Bethany and Earlham School of Religion, he suggests that theopoetics is emerged as a kind of critique against classical theology. And it's where theology tends to emphasize thought. Theopoetics tends to emphasize imagination in wondering about God. And then I want to offer an idea of Gordon Kaufman. Gordon Kaufman is a theologian. He was born in 1925, died in 2011. And Gordon Kaufman has a thought experiment, is the way that he describes it. And his thought experiment is to suggest that God is creativity. Not that God is a creative construct, okay, but that God itself is creativity. And so I want to briefly explore those ideas today, and then love to hear from you. Okay, God. The term God has been used more often than any other in languages to name what we might dare say is ultimate reality, or what is stirs in us value and meaning for our human life. God is kind of our ultimate point of reference. That's the way that Kaufman puts it. So when we use the name God, what do we think we're talking about? I want to be on record as saying from the get-go, and I'm borrowing from biblical scholar Sandra Schneiders, who in 1990 made it very clear that God is not two men and a bird. So now that we have that established, Marcus suggests that how we think about God is a really important question, and that it has major consequences. And so he said that because God functions so centrally in human life, that it's an important question to wonder about. What are we talking about when we talk about God? Because it matters. And many of us today may feel that the word God is so wrecked and it's become so bankrupt that we can't use it anymore. But as I said, we are at a time when we have an opportunity to reimagine and even re-symbol what we think we're talking about. In the Christian tradition, what we've inherited, God is described most often in human terms, in anthropomorphic terms. God is also described as rock, or as wind, or as a wonderful phrase from the Old Testament, that God is the sound of thinnest silence. Okay, so God is described in a variety of ways in our scriptures, but I think the emphasis in what we've inherited and how we tend to talk about God is in anthropomorphic terms. God walks with us and talks with us, and God speaks, and God writes, and God shows wrath, and God shows compassion, and God shows love, and God shows jealousy. And in that, interestingly enough, God copies us. Theology, then, our God talk, is then arguably an imaginative construction. What do you think of that? That theology, our God talk, is an imaginative construction. And when we talk about our relatedness with God, we tend to talk about it in terms of our relationship with God, which is actually anthropomorphic. And I say, as human beings, we can't help but anthropomorphize. I do it all the time. For instance, I talk to my car. And I broke up with a guy a long time ago because I didn't like the way he talked to his car. So I think that we tend to anthropomorphize in trying to describe our relatedness to things. And we talk about it in human terms, in terms of our relationship with things. And I want to read a poem that I think describes this really well. And I borrow this from Scott Holland. The poet is Liesl Mueller, and I was not familiar with this poem, and I learned it from Scott. So I want to read it to you because I think this is, as we think about how we anthropomorphize, I think this poem says it wonderfully. She writes, "What happened is we grew lonely living among things." I just want to flag that as is part of our need to anthropomorphize? Does it come out of a kind of existential loneliness? I'm just asking. What happened is we grew lonely living among the things. So we gave the clock a face, the chair a back, the table 4 stout legs, which will never fatigue. We fitted our shoes with tongues as smooth as our own, and hung tongues inside bells so we could listen to their emotional language. And because we loved graceful profiles, the pitcher received a lip, the bottle a long, slender neck. Even what was beyond us was recast in our image. We gave the country a heart, the storm an eye, the cave a mouth, so we could pass into safety. So do we anthropomorphize out of loneliness, or out of our need for safety, or some sense of more relatedness? Well, I really like that poem of Mueller's, and I think that we do the same thing with God. We give him, if you will, a mouth, an eye, arms, a back, legs. And our way of talking about God is part of the work of our imagination. But when we do this, and as I said, I don't think we can help but anthropomorphize, and that's not a bad thing. But when we do this and talk about God in this way, I think we need to be clear and aware what we're doing, that we are anthropomorphizing. Because what we are realizing is that God is not a being or a person or an Übermensch, right? The one who is like us, but better and greater and omniscient and all powerful and sovereign and has the whole world in his hands, as it were. When we anthropomorphize, which we can't help, we just need to be aware that that's what we're doing. Because the big news, and we've talked about this, Scott talked about this, that made the cover of Time magazine on April 8th, 1966, is that the anthropomorphic God, the God of supernatural theism, the creator God, who is very much like a being, is dead. And some would say never existed at all. But the way that we think about in the beginning God, we tend to think of God as the creator God, which actually is an anthropomorphic image. And in the beginning of creation, the anthropos, or the human, was far from being on the scene. So, as you can tell this morning, I'm sort of emphasizing the non-anthropocentric awareness that God is not a being, an Übermensch. It's not about personhood, okay? And I'm one of these people that, as I said earlier, I anthropomorphize all over the place. So I'm not going to give that up, but I'm just thinking that through in a different way now. And borrowing from Gordon Kaufman, there's something else that I've been thinking about that did not occur to me, which is that to even name God is love, and I do that, or God is compassion, or the nature and character of God, which is pretty anthropomorphic sounding, is justice, compassion, that those are characteristics of God. That has tremendous rhetorical power. And I'm not going to give it up. But Kaufman suggests that God is love is the epitome of anthropomorphism in Christianity. I just hadn't thought about it that way. That is an anthropomorphic way of talking about God, because things like love, justice, compassion matter to human life and existence. Those are things that contribute to our sense of meaning or meaninglessness, as does the idea of evil. That evil is also an anthropomorphic construct because of how things affect our human existence, our human lives, our own suffering. Evil and things that go badly and are destructive and we have no control over. That's our problem. Suffering is our problem. But when we talk about God as the almighty creator, who is the cause of all things, then evil becomes God's problem. And I don't think that theodicy, suffering, the problem of evil, is God's problem. I think it's our problem. But we've inherited an image of God that makes the sufferings and horrors of the world God's problem. And I think theologically that has caused a lot of confusion and angst in our lives. So my talking about this is not to say that there is no God, or even that I am asking the question, is there a God? That's not what my intention is here, but rather, what is God? What is God? And we can't know. We can't fully know. We never will be able to fully know. So God has so often been referred to as mystery. Gordon Kaufman does that. A lot of us do that God is ultimately mystery. We can't absolutize what we think God is. But that does not mean that whatever it is that the symbol of God does not suggest that there is something more that we are dealing with, more and greater, and something that we don't fully understand in our human existence. So, and as I said earlier, we are at a very opportune time in our own grappling with what is religion and what is God, to reimagine what we're talking about in light of what we know today about the universe and the cosmos and physics and complexity theory and quantum mechanics and a lot of stuff that I don't even know about. So we have an opportunity to be self-critical about theology, which is a good thing to do, and to reimagine, reconceive, reconstruct our symbol of God and what we think it is, and what we think is that ultimate reference that can help to shape and inform our own sense of meaning and can orient our own human life. And I think that as we wonder and puzzle about God, are there some ways of thinking about God that are more responsible than other ways? So, and by the way, philosophers, anthropologists, sociologists, poets, artists, there are many that have been grappling with this very thing. And I'm just wanting to bring it to our conversation today. Are there other ways of thinking about God that are actually more responsible than other ways of thinking about God? And is this not the opportune time to wonder? So, this notion of sort of reimagining and reconstructing theology, which, as I said, tends to emphasize thought. And that leads me now to theopoetics, which tends to emphasize imagination. Theopoetics, poesis, means to make or to create. It draws more attention to creativity than thought. I just said that. So let me provide a contrast about theopoetics and theology. Okay, theology, I suggest, seeks to declare. It's like I know. Okay. By the way, I noticed that a couple of people have their hands up already. If you don't mind, we'll wait until plenary time. Okay. So, because I know what I'm saying is probably provoking a lot of things, which I hope it does, but keep your note. All right. Because we'll get to you. But poiesis means to make or to create. And so theology, I suggest, seeks more to declare. Okay. This is what we've come up with. Whereas theopoetics invites us to imagine about God. Okay. Theology has a tendency to demand. It's like, this is what you are to believe. This is what we've sorted out. This is what you are to believe. Theopoetics, theopoiesis, talks about God in a way that will evoke, rather than stating what to believe. Let me share maybe this is not a good example, but there's a line from a poet by Delmore Schwartz that says, like intuition's starlight. What does that exactly mean? Like intuition's starlight, Jesus pierced the 12. That doesn't tell you what to believe. It doesn't tell you exactly who Jesus is, but it describes an experience that something pierced the 12, pierces us too. Like starlight's intuition or intuition's starlight, something bright in the night sky. Okay. Or Mary Oliver saying he was 10,000 times more dangerous than the storm, than the sea. Well, that's not telling you something to believe in, but it's describing how maybe people experience Jesus when he stood up in the boat and they say that the storm calmed. But that's all descriptive, metaphorical language to try to describe an experience. It's not telling you what to believe. Okay. So theology, I think, tends to prescribe. It offers, it defines some presuppositions. And theopoetics invites us to think, but to imagine. Theology tends to argue its case. Okay, systematics tends to make a case for itself, for why we're coming up with all of this and why it all holds together. Theopoetics, theopoiesis, holds open the thoughts rather than definitively making a case. I mean, theology sort of establishes. Theopoetics is more provisional, knowing that its understanding will always change. Theology tends to make conclusions. Theopoetics is about possibilities. Okay. So to put it this way, I suggest that theology operates more within a closed system. And theopoetics operates more within an open system, which is, I think, why theopoetics has, it emerged in that God is dead time, that the God of supernatural theism is no longer meaningful for us. It's no longer descriptive of our experience of quote unquote reality. And theopoetics is a critique and a challenge to the method of theology, which says, there's another way of going about trying to describe that in which we live and move and have our being. Okay. Scott Holland, and theopoetics, therefore, the focus actually of theopoetics is more on God. And maybe this isn't fair to say, but theology's focus, as we've inherited, seems to be more about beliefs. You can challenge this and help me to think this through more. Scott Holland made a very interesting comment. He said, religion is imaginative before it is propositional. Religion is imaginative before it is propositional. He said that reason can only follow the path first opened by the imagination. Okay. I find that really interesting. And I'd love to know what you make of that. That religion is imaginative before it is propositional, that reason can only follow the path that has been opened up by the imagination. And imagination is a gift of our humanity. It's not about making things up. Okay? It's not about fantasy. It's not about make-believe. But imagination is our capacity that puts us in touch with what is profoundly human and with, for lack of a better word, spirituality, or the recognition that there is something more that is greater than we are, that there is a mystery to our existence. And that we may never know the why and the cause of it, but we're aware that we are part of something almost unfathomable, but we're part of it. So where reason has so often, I think, been thought of in static terms, like, this is it, sort of elevating reason as sort of the ultimate criteria for what we measure our thoughts against. Reason is actually not a fixed thing. It will follow imagination's moves, or it will be affected by other things that we discover or invent. And concerning reason, when we come to the limit of our understanding, of our knowledge, I think that's when when human beings tend to turn to imagination and language and symbols and metaphor. And not so much because they are objectively representing what we're grappling with, but symbols and language and metaphor has an interesting power and capability of exposing sort of an excess of meaning. And metaphor and symbol is, it moves towards multiplicity and pluralism and diversity and possibilities, because those things are not fixed. They're descriptive, but they are not saying that they are fully, absolutely representational. So I need a good philosopher at my side. Help me think this through. I think it's interesting, this pops into my head. I think it's interesting to note that Hitler was only fond of representational art. Anything that was not representational, he found threatening. I think that's an interesting thing to think about. That it's like, no, this is this. There's a direct representation. It's a way of sort of saying, this is truth, and this is how we reflect it. But art, and I think language, is not that absolute. And for some, that is destabilizing, but it also suggests the multiplicity of possibility and of creativity. So needless to say, theopoetics is, it resists a theocracy. You know, any system that says that we do this in the name of God, or that the rulers of the state or whatever are divinely placed by God. And again, this is very anthropomorphic, okay? But theopoetics resists any equation of theology with theocracy. Theopoetics calls to us, I think. By the way, Jack suggests that God is a call, but calls to us to reimagine what is possible, and that seeks more life. Scott Holland said that imagination has a connection to eros, that an eros being sort of the driving desire towards life. Okay. And that theopoetics is related to that driving desire towards life, and creates symbolic constructions that reflect it, but also those constructions will change. So then what does faith in God mean in this postmodern world today? All of what I'm describing, theopoetics and the non-anthropomorphic understanding of God, that's all part of this postmodern turn. So how are we to live together in the world in which we find ourselves? And what is our participation in an imaginative construction that can help us live more fully, more humanely, and even live towards a future that can be better? So, these are thoughts. I know that I'm saying theopoetics has more to do with experience, but I'm wrestling with thought, and I'm wanting you to help me. So briefly now to move to creativity. Gordon Kaufman suggests that, and by the way, his book, In the Beginning, ... Creativity. And I posted a quote from that book in our opening slides. It's an accessible book. I think it's very interesting. It's not a big book. And I invite you to take a look at that if this kind of conversation intrigues you at all. So Gordon Kaufman, his thought experiment, proposes that God is creativity, that God is creativity rather than personhood, and that creativity is still at work, and that creativity is a central feature of our own humanness. Now, let me say, as you're probably suspecting, Gordon Kaufman is an evolutionist. And he claims that evolution, that creativity is part of this evolution. That creativity is not in itself is not purposeful, but that it is important. And that we as human beings are the result of billions of years of evolutionary and, in terms of our planet, complex ecological ordering of life, and we have evolved in that. Kaufman adds to the word creativity serendipitous creativity. And serendipity is sort of what we don't expect, what is unplanned, what is novel, and can be beneficent, you know. It can also be not so, but that serendipitous creativity has its capacity for novelty and newness and the unexpected and possibilities, and even what we might think now is impossible, that's characteristic of creativity. And by the way, I think that is related to our conversations with Jack Caputo about event. What is the event? So to say that God is creativity moves away from the anthropomorphic images of God. It also suggests that God grows and changes, which has some vast implications, but that ultimately God is a mystery, because we can't ultimately say how God came into being, for instance, but only that God is something that we relate to. And for him to say that God is creativity is a really interesting proposition. And granted, it's beyond our cognitive reach. God is, which therefore invites our imagination. Now, when I mentioned earlier about love and evil being part of an anthropomorphic frame, let me make a positive case for that. Because as human beings, if part of our evolution has been to say, God is love, that's our value. Or is it that God is justice, or how we Jesus is a nonviolent human being who says how important love and justice is. That sense of the importance of love, justice, nonviolence, they have emerged in us as meaningful and purposeful. And those are evolutionary recognitions that come out of our human development. So, and then that now that we say God, which might, is still maybe a point of ultimate reference, that we say God is love or God is justice, that the fact that we assigned that to God tells us a lot about what we value and what we think is important. Let me say something as a sidebar to that. Richard Holloway, who I think he's a marvelous theologian. Richard Holloway wrote a book many years ago called Godless Morality. And people were really upset with that idea, godless morality. But I think what he's getting at is that I don't love because God told me so. I know that a friend of mine said to me once, well, gosh, if there isn't a God, a human kind of God, why would I do anything good? Are you kidding? it's in our capacity as humans, this is part of our greatness, I think, to realize that love is important. So, do we need God to make us moral human beings? That's something worth asking. And I'm curious to know what you make of that. To say a godless morality, is that a bad thing to say? Or is it, if we take Gordon Kaufman's notion that God is creativity, and we're part of that evolutionary expression of creativity, and we have come to say love is important and justice is important and valued. That's a fruit, if you will, of the evolutionary move of creativity as it's expressed itself in humanity. And I mean, could I say thanks be to God for that? Maybe so. So Kaufman's suggestion that creativity is God, that God is creativity, that God is a process, a serendipitous process. And by the way, I'm not really a process theologian, but I think that they might draw on this idea too. And that the notion of forgiveness and reconciliation and loving your enemy and all of that, that is part of the evolution of creativity as we experience and talk about it as human beings. So I am, and that this creative imagination is not just about discovery, but it's also about invention. So the future of humanity, and because of what humanity has done to the planet, is largely in our hands. And how are we going to express our own creativity in light of now what we say is purposeful and meaningful and valued as we understand it as human beings? How are we going to make decisions about that moving into the future? And again, the question for me comes up, are there ways of thinking about God that are more responsible than other ways? So, God, theopoetics, theopoiesis, a different way of God talk. And the suggestion, the thought experiment that maybe God is creativity itself. Okay. I'd love to know what you make of what I'm fussing with, and would love to get your ideas and thoughts and what you make of all of this. So, hello, Theo. So let me give us just 1 minute of silence, and I've been muddling. So let's just give us 1 minute of silence. A number of you already have your thoughts right at the tip of your tongue. I know you won't lose them, but just to be quiet for a moment, compose your thoughts, see what rises up for others of you who are still wondering, what the heck are we talking about today? And I am looking forward to a conversation with you. So let me give you a minute and I'll tell you when that minute is up. Okay, our minute is up. I think that many of you who've been part of Second Saturday know the listening guidelines that we follow. And so because I want to maximize our plenary time, I'm not going to read those guidelines today, but what I will underscore is listen to one another with your whole self. Okay. So let us get underway. Jeff, would you help us to move into the plenary time?
Sure. Thanks, Marianne. You've got us all muddling along with you. And
Excellent.
there are some wonderful comments and questions in the chat. And I would just encourage those of you who put a question or a comment in the chat to please raise your hand, and hopefully we'll get to you, because you have sparked a lot of interesting ideas from people. So
that's what I'm hoping for. So, and I need them. So, and by the way, as you know, I don't read the chat while I'm doing this. It would be much too distracting, but I will, Megan, if you're listening, I'd love a copy of the chat. So if you want to make a copy of that for me and send it to me, that will be to my benefit and pleasure. Okay. So I don't want to miss out on the chat, but I'm not part of it right now, but I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible this morning.
Great. Just a quick reminder, we'll give you 3 minutes. I said 2 before, but really 3. So 3 minutes. I'll put up a finger if you're starting to go over that 3-minute time, and that you'll have thought about what you want to say before you raise your hand. And I know there's a lot of people who've been thinking for a while, so that's
good. Well, help me out here. I don't want to be alone in this muddling. Okay, so please jump up in.
So Bruce Robertson, do you want to unmute yourself, Bruce?
Thank you.
Great, Bruce. I know you've been waiting for quite a while, so I'm eager to hear from you.
Excited. And Marianne,
yes,
thank you so much for leading us to a profound place. I am thinking of that beautiful story of Jesus and the disciples taking the route to Jerusalem through Samaria. And the disciples go into the town looking for hospitality, and they are refused. So they want Jesus to call down fire from heaven on these SOBs, give them what they deserve.
Right.
I've
done that occasionally myself.
Wonderful. He says, you do not know who you are. What do you mean? We're Jews, they're Samaritans, our enemies. No, that ain't the story. And what I feel Jesus was doing is what you're talking about. Wow. Jesus was very modern, too modern for us, so most of us didn't understand him. Because we're now unfolding the new paradigm of non-duality. And in non-duality, if we find that we are lonely, we're back in duality again. Loneliness is a product of separation.
Wow.
And we often use words, even good theology. Why? To control, which is to separate. But not always. You have used words this morning to bring us to the numinous. Thank you. So I'm just suggesting it's a profound place to look at the experience of non-duality, which means God, what we assume is God, is present now among us. All we have to do is come to the heart and listen. I could give a good example of how we use words and strategies of avoidance, but I'll leave that. Like an elephant in the room, we don't talk about that. We avoid. But your invitation is for us to awaken. And for me, Jesus is a super modern person because he demonstrates what it means to be human and awake. What a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would even say that Jesus is a postmodern person. You know, and for those who emphasize Christo, you know, Jesus as that the Christ as an important, I don't know if I want to use the word archetype or not, but Jesus is an example of human evolution. And I think I think that what he talks about and knows and expresses and lives is hope for us. Because we've got that evolution, you know, we're part of that human evolution. You know, anyway, Bruce, I love what you're saying. And I also love your comment that actually we don't know who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that we better explore more who we are. Because I think that what we experience and discover may make the difference in terms of how long we exist.
All the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, do you write?
Yes.
Good. Do you write poetry?
I'm writing a book called The Garden of the Dawn.
The Garden, I'm going to write this down. The Garden, here's little Theo behind me. Hello, Theo. The Garden of the Dawn. Please keep us posted.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for your comments. And I agree that we're part of a new paradigm. So this is opportune time. You know, this is the best of times and the worst of times, right? But I think this is, for us, this is opportune time.
Yeah.
Awakening. And as Rumi says, don't go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you.
So, Marianne, you must be doing something right because you have the Lutheran Church with their hand raised.
The entire Lutheran Church.
LCOR, Lutheran Church, if they want to.
Oh, in fact, it's
Me, it's Lily.
It's my friend Lily Stahlberg from Fort Morgan, Colorado.
Yeah.
Good morning, Fort Morgan. Good morning.
Good morning, Marianne. We have listened here, and as usual, I am just fascinating, and I'm right there with you in the new paradigm.
Indeed,
But
you are.
I am also an evolutionist, but in my work in congregations, I know for sure that some people, or even many people, will not even understand what you're talking about, and that's where they are in their evolution.
Honey, sometimes I think I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm right there with you. And my question is about acceptance. That even if we think these high thoughts that are so philosophical, when you boil it down to to people who need a very physical, concrete God to whom we pray, people need help to deal with their fear of death, to fear of annihilation, to fear of just disappearing. How do we translate this higher language into the language of the common folk? Who will be
love.
If they listen to you?
I would say love one another.
Love one another. Thank you.
Love one another. And then
so,
the kicker that comes out of Christianity is love your enemies.
love your enemies. So we need to evolve into this framework that we have found, we have evolved to.
Yeah.
And Jesus is asking us, and to boil it down to this,
I think it's love one another. And
Exactly.
also I'll put in, love yourself. Well, it is, do we know who we are? As Bruce said.
No,
So
and
love,
yeah,
love
ahead.
one another. So, and love, and dare to love your enemy. And in a sense, love this one, as Mary Oliver would say, wild and precious life.
Wild and precious
is a
life.
task. As says, to love what is lovely and will not last. What a task to ask of anyone or anything, but it is ours.
It is ours.
That's Mary Oliver. And I think that is part of our task. Okay.
And in the spirit of evolutionary theology, I would go one step forward. We don't know who we are, but we also do not know what we are becoming. For me, becoming, it's not only who we are today, but you invite us into becoming more. Right. And I love the godless morality because God, whatever God is, and it's a mystery, as you say, lives in me, and I love because I cannot help it.
Yes.
Not because I'm afraid of God, but because I feel so loved by this creativity. I feel so surrounded by this love that I cannot help but love my friend. So I love you, but I'm training myself to love my enemies.
Yes,
that's it.
What a task. Yes.
What a task.
Thank you, Lily. And Fort Morgan, good morning, and how lovely to have you join us today. So terrific. You're in good hands with Lily Shelburne.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. Susan D'Amico, would you unmute yourself?
Good morning. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Susan.
I am
eager to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. I've been hopping around different things. I listened to a lecture of a dearly admired archaeologist, anthropologist who's an atheist. And her lecture was compelling, and I agreed with most of it. And then I'm doing a class with Richard Rohr's about the Franciscan Way, and it's way over my head, so I'm struggling with that. I saw a lecture from the Joseph Campbell Foundation about Thou Art That, which coincided with Richard Rohr. And then you bring up theopoetics and talk about imagination and creativity. And so my post was, does God exist if we're lonely and God is a creation of our imagination? And the answer, the seeking of the answer.
Just a second. I'm not saying that God is a creation of our imagination.
Okay.
I'm saying that God is, to borrow from Kaufman, God is creativity. Okay. And that how we relate or describe or whatever is a process of our imagination. So I'm not saying that we made up God.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that God is a projection of our imagination.
Okay.
Even though our imagination is how we talk about God. It's an imaginative construct. But that God is, and Kaufman is saying God is creativity. Anyway, let me back up. Just finish what you were saying, because I may have jumped in too quickly, not understanding. So
no, that's I guess my question is, when I'm delving into these things for myself, moving away from, our old construct,
right,
is I'm finding, and this is why I struggle with the contemplative part of all of this, is if the science is fact and explicit, and we don't believe unless we see, which I don't necessarily agree with, but there's that. How do we pray to creativity? And if everything is unknowable, we really don't know.
Right.
and it's a mystery.
Right.
I love the idea of the open skylight and opening up. That's that is really helping me, but I'm struggling with the amorphousness of moving away from the closed system.
Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, come on.
We all are. We all are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And-
yeah, we all are, because that is part of the mystery, is that we will never know.
Ugh.
And I don't think that science will ever give us all the keys to quote unquote the kingdom, but that more things are going to open and open and open because of what science finds. And so therefore our symbols and language and metaphor about what is God, that's going to change too.
Okay.
But I still think that there is something that is going on. And I'm intrigued by Kaufman's suggestion that it is creativity itself.
I'm gonna have to get that book.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
what you bring and your interpretations. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're part of this conversation, Susan. It means a lot. Yeah. And when Jack says things like God does not exist, God insists. Can we put that in the God is creativity framework? If God insists, and as human beings, what does that mean? If God insists, and so I'm sort of playing with all this, and as you can tell, sort of wondering. And yes, we close this. I love that season tongue and groove.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, though, that's really important to remember is the skylight can't exist without the tongue and groove. And so we're thinking in dualities. And
Right. Thank you, Bruce.
we'll never move away from we'll never move away from anthropomorphizing. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But it can't continue to be a closed system. We still need the skylight.
Yeah.
We need both.
Wow.
Because we live in both.
Because we live in both, right?
We live in both.
Right.
Right.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Susan. And I just love all the resources, all of the places you're looking for interest and imagination and wonder and all that, and keep bringing it here.
Yeah.
My next thing is quantum mechanics.
Excellent. Excellent. Go, girl.
Okay, thanks, Susan. How about Lynn Tolk?
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you. This is so exciting. I've always been more excited by ideas than by anything else, I think. But
You
thank you.
haven't met my dog.
A senior dog is beautiful. But thank you for providing all of this. I put in the chat a line from a song that I wrote, and that was based on experience. And my experience had no name, no face, no shape, no form, simply the sense of being surrounded by compassion. So in the song, it's called Whatever Names, and some have called you father, some have called you mother, some have called you source of all you name. I don't think it matters, so long as there's an answer when the deep part of the soul cries out in pain, which was my experience at the time, and that was about 40 years ago. Currently, because I'm making notes here, but currently I'm really studying Ilia Delio's latest book, which is just lovely, and I'm just sailing along until I get to the end. And I have problems with technology, and I may have that first axial mind trying to deal with second axial stuff. But the thing that I'm taking from it right now that is exciting me the most is the sense, well, this is my interpretation of what she's saying. I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but the sense that God and humans are co-evolving as a process. And that, doesn't leave us hanging out anywhere or God hanging out anywhere. We're hanging out together.
Mm.
And I really like that idea.
Yeah.
Also the idea of process, of motion, of movement. Every moment I'm a different person. And every moment is a different opportunity or invitation or calling or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that Kaufman would agree that if God is creativity, okay, that it will continue to evolve. It'll continue to change.
Yeah.
It's serendipitous creativity. That the unexpected, the unknown, that what we haven't imagined yet, that all of that is still a possibility in whatever this is that we're part of. Okay, so and by the way, Ilia Delio, I'm going to say this at the very end, but she has a conference coming up on December 1st through 3rd. You can go to her website, Christogenesis.
Yeah, I've been there.
And December 1 through 3, she has a program, and Jack Caputo will be giving the opening address.
Mm.
So I highly recommend that. And I actually have a quote that I'm going to post in the closing slides, that Jack's description of what he's going to be doing.
Oh.
But I wanted to advertise it because Jack, and then Catherine Keller, who's somebody that actually I hope to have on it with us. But so our audience would be interested, I think, in what Delio is doing with in her organization, Christogenesis. So thank you, Lynn.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. John Schwartz, your hand is up. Can you unmute yourself, John?
I unmuted and have appeared.
Yeah, good.
Great.
I'm reminded by a comment, I think by a geneticist, I think it was Theo Dobzhansky. He says, reality is not stranger than you imagine, it is stranger than you can imagine.
I think that's a great comment.
Yeah, it has stuck with me because yes. So what I think we're dealing with here is basically mystery.
Yep.
And I've been thinking about that in terms of both science and theology, religion. Science uses mathematics as its basic language. It has rules, and it produces concrete results. And it works very, very well in a large part, at least, of creation. Though if you push it far enough, science is at base mystery. And theology uses metaphor as its basic thinking language. As I'm reading scripture, I'm trying to read it in the view that these people experience something for which they have no precedent. It was something entirely different, from the wheels to Jesus and his life and ministry. And I've just lost where I was going with that.
Well, actually, we are experiencing things that are unprecedented also.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that doesn't.
In our evolutionary place in the world, in our own development, in the cosmos, so in a sense, we're in an unprecedented place too.
With evolution, we always will be.
I think that's right.
So when we encounter something like Jesus calming the waves, something happened, but it was beyond the experience of the disciples in the boat, and it is beyond ours. And so we use a metaphor. It was like and so I'm working back and forth between metaphor as a language and mathematics as a language.
Yeah.
And just as an example of mathematics and science ending in mystery. Suppose you are sitting on the end of a dock with a fishing pole and a bobber, and the waves are coming by, and you're hoping maybe a bass or even something bigger will take it. And you look down, you see the bobber, it's a particle, it's there. It's in a particular location. And you're watching the waves come by. But you can't say the wave is there because no, there's a part of it over there, or there's a part of it over that's come by me. So in that sense, waves and particles seem to be very, very different. Yet, and someone mentioned quantum mechanics, if we use that particular mathematical method to solve the equations in physics, you end up with, is an electron a particle
Yeah,
or a wave?
right.
And so, but if you ask the electron, are you a particle or a wave? And the electrons will always tell you the truth. The electron says, what do you want me to be?
Yeah.
And,
So an
and that
observed particle behaves differently.
doesn't behave differently. It is different.
Okay, interesting.
Just, and the question we ask of it defines our perception of it.
Okay.
But not what it is.
And isn't this just great?
Well, it is. So
If
thank
you like this kind of thing, right? I mean, yes, I think all of this is wondrous. Wondrous.
Fortunately, it isn't that if we want it, it is, and we have
Right.
to come to terms
Yeah.
with it.
As a note to you about mathematics and metaphor, Kaufman, I heard him say in a not in a real-time lecture, but in something that I heard, that he actually he wanted to be a mathematician. He was at the this was 2 years before he died, and he said, in many ways, I wish that I'd pursued mathematics. And for similar reasons that you were just talking about, it's like, because mathematics is kind of the language of, wonder, and he said, but he was more drawn to theology and metaphor because of its effect on human beings.
Interesting.
Because he felt like what he really wanted to struggle with, he was a pastor as well, and pacifist, by the way, a Mennonite. What does this have to do with us? How do we live in whatever this is we're living in? So he went in the direction of theology and metaphor rather than mathematics, but he was also completely enthralled with what mathematics as the language of mystery can tell us. So you're right in sync with Gordon Kaufman.
Good company.
A very, very good company, in my opinion. Anyway, thank you, John. All of this is fascinating and provocative, isn't it? So
It is.
yeah. And, and we're part of this. Can you believe it? And we do amazing things, and what a mess we're making of it too, let me say.
True, but occasionally it works out well.
Yes, it does. And that's our hope. What brought us here, our hope is that maybe there'll be more possibilities, that'll be more life-giving,
Yes.
more life-driven ahead. And
Amen
we,
to that.
we have a part to play in it.
Great.
Anyway, thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Carol Machek, would you unmute yourself?
Okay. I am not nearly as intellectual as all the previous speakers, but I just wanted to share briefly. I read a book maybe a year ago by Merlin Sheldrake, and it was all about fungi. And it was fascinating. And I came home and said to my husband, I think that God is fungi. And he said, why? He said, why do you think that? And I said, because it's ubiquitous. We don't even know it's there. It's under the ground. And if it causes everything to work. It's the basis of creation, but it's actually recreation, because everything that dies, and everything on our planet dies, we die. And fungi are the little engines underneath and on top of and wherever, who break us down into these elements so that we can be reused. And one of the most powerful videos I saw on a YouTube was a mouse died and disintegrated. It was one of these fast action, disintegrated. You watched all that. And then shortly up came in the same area all kinds of grass and flowers,
Wow,
beautiful things.
I love it.
And I just thought that is quite so amazing. That is creativity. And that is the engine in my mind. I know this sounds strange, but an engine for God. And I grapple with who God is, but I do believe God is the energy, the absolute, because energy, the first law of thermodynamics say that energy cannot be, well, maybe it's a law of creativity. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. And so in my mind, that is God. God is the energy that is existent in this universe. And how amazing that that energy is propelled by these fungi, these mycelium under the soil that we never even thought about 20 years ago. And that makes me appreciate what an incredible power source God is.
I love it.
So not very deep, but just some thoughts.
Oh, I think quite, I think it's a great image and in a sense, I mean, it is its own thing and it's a metaphor for the more too, what you're describing. So I love what you've said. And I think, you know, my dog is named Theo Poetics, actually. That's his name and I call him Theo. But I think my next dog might be Fungi.
That would be good. Mine too.
Yeah. Anyway,
Thank you.
I really appreciate what you're saying and very, very much. It's
Thank you.
marvelous.
Great. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Carol.
Jennifer Molesky.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is an amazing conversation today. Thank you for opening up this inquiry. So I want to keep this short. And I'll struggle to do that. Long ago, I had this, I made a model about thinking for a class. And I talked about sort of the dialectic that's between sort of like, when we're experiential, when we're at one with someone, when we're really profoundly connected with people, it's like it's a moment beyond language, you know, and then we have like what we can know, you know, where language lives, where we can think about things. And that this was a model of conflict resolution that I was proposing. And it's like, you know, we are constantly going from one of these states to the other. So, and for me, I think that our problem is that we forget that whatever language, whatever meaning, whatever we've decided, whatever theology, it's like we forget that you know, that's just the one now. And that's just the one like that, you know, it's just one of the ones that's emerged from not knowing. You know, we grab onto it and we think it's the only one, or we think it's the best one, or we think it's the so and that so that was part of what I think of when I'm confronted by your theology versus theopoetics.
Right.
So
what you're describing is definitely an open system. I mean, it's an open. I mean, if there's an eternity, there it is.
Right. And so when John Schwartz was talking about like when he was doing his comments and earlier, I thought, well, if like, how do we define God and what does it make possible that we think of God in that way? Right. So so
and
I thought
I like that question. What does it make possible? And then sort of one question
exactly,
about,
you know,
are there
I mean,
more responsible ways of talking about God?
Right. You know, creativity can have a great edge to it. I mean, you know, viruses are creative forces, and cancer is a very creative force,
Right.
you know. So, you know, and yet, so okay, what does it open up for me? It's the maker in me. The maker, and it's that not knowing, like creativity can get at that, at the root of that not knowing, the
Yeah.
thing that emerges, that serendipitous thing, the thing that comes out of the communal experience that we have no words for.
Yeah.
So, and it's easy for me to view that which is God in me when I think about God as creativity, that like that's what makes it possible. That's what that makes possible for me.
Okay.
And just one more thought, that when you talked about Jack Caputo, God Insists, it made me think of Dylan Thomas's poem that starts, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower, drives my green age. So it's the when I think about God insisting, if God is creativity, you know, while any of us had been taken over by creativity at some point. And so if God insists, then perhaps it's that the force that through the green fuse drives the flower.
You see, I love what you've just done, because you've just done a theopoetic comment. I mean, that's the difference between theology, trying to explain something, and theopoetics, which is describing something.
Yeah.
So Dylan Thomas, okay, he is doing what theopoetics is suggesting.
Yeah.
As a way for us to not only talk about, but give ourselves permission to talk about it in this way. And I think that's the skylight in the season, Tongue and Groove.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Ted Larson, I think we maybe have to let you be our last speaker. We're just about at time.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you, Marianne and Jeff, for making these discussions possible. I love the thought of theopoetics because I see the Bible much that way. And also maybe my name is Theodore, so that helps.
Gift of God, gift of God.
Poetry is a creative mystery that allows us to expand our mind. And I don't struggle with the way other people anthropomorphize God as much anymore, because I don't think of God that way myself. I have a long prayer I read every morning, and part of it is faith. I try to understand faith as a way of life to live love, not a set of beliefs or opinions of doctrine, but an open-minded way of allowing my heart to trust love. God, I pray to understand God as a verb, creativity, love, and yet my relationship to that verb is personal. Incarnation, I pray that I can universalize the incarnation and know everything is interrelated. And the word, I pray to understand the word as a conversation of matter and spirit. It comes because I use Einstein's theory of relativity, E = mc squared, to understand that I can understand God as a verb, as energy, as love. And along with John Schwartz, who spoke earlier, I'm a math major and a music minor, so I can translate pretty easily people's definition of God as a person into theopoetics as a verb, love. So that's where I'm at, and I really appreciate your input of theopoetics to help.
Yeah. Ted, thank you. And thank you for sharing that prayer with us and for us. Thank you.
Ted, there's been a request if you could post that prayer. I don't know if you have a copy of it, but if you could post it in the chat, that'd be great.
Oh, okay. I sure will.
Yeah, lovely.
Marianne, I think we're at
We're at
time.
time. Okay, if there are those of you who still have something, and Sheila, I see that you're in the queue. If you can come to coffee time, we'll give you a little airtime. That would be great. All right. To close, let me just remind folks that on December 9th, which is our next second Saturday conversation, we will have guests, and our guests will be Jack Caputo and Brandon Scott. And they are both going to be with us on December 9th, and they're going to talk about Jesus more through a theopoetic lens. And which I think will sort of move towards Jesus being a poet and his teachings being the poetry, and maybe what does it mean that Jesus has been lifted into theopoetic space. I'll let them do this. But one of the things that I am honored to tell you is that they wanted to have this conversation together. They're colleagues and friends, but they said, we hardly ever have a chance to get together and talk. And both Brandon and Jack have been guests of mine, and they suggested that they come together to be able to talk together about Jesus, because they have wanted to have this conversation together for quite some time. And they said that this is the place they'd like to do it. So I am very honored that they see Second Saturday Conversation as a place to do that. And of course, you folks are wonderful participants and listeners and catalysts for all of this. So I highly recommend you coming to the December 9 session. Of course, I'll send out an invitation and invite others, because I think that this will be a really important and helpful conversation for us to have. So that's December 9th. As I said, Elia Delio is having a conference December 1 through 3. Go to her website, Christogenesis.org, or to Jack Caputo's website, which is John D. Caputo Week Theology. That's his Facebook page. And you can see the registration information. And they're going to be talking about God in the world of in the quantum world that we live in. So it should be an interesting opportunity. Let me close by doing going back a little bit to an anthropomorphic imaging. So I'm just going to draw a couple of lines from a poem by E.E. Cummings. He says, I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. And here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than soul can hope or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that keeps the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. And in light of what we've been saying about God as creativity, I really like E.E. Cummings' language as a way for me to say, I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you on the 9th of December with Jack and Brandon. And for those who can stay, we'll have a little bit more time to chat during coffee time.